You're watching live from Paris. Glad you could join us. These are our headlines this hour. Over 6,000 people given a presidential pardon and released from prison in Myanmar, among them 2 Reuters journalists. They were arrested and put behind bars in 2017, charged with breaking the country's Official Secrets Act when they reported on the crackdown of Rohingya Muslims. Turkey's electoral board revokes the mandate of the mayor of Istanbul, saying the March election was flawed. That comes after the party of the president called for as much. Istanbul is the economic capital. The man who won the vote says the ruling party is claiming fraud simply because it lost. And as South Africa gets ready to hold its general elections, we continue our coverage of some of the main issues of concern to voters there. With staggeringly high unemployment and economic woes, xenophobia has been on the rise across the country. We'll be speaking live to our correspondent Aisha Ismail in this edition. Also coming up this hour, trade tensions between the world's 2 biggest economies continue to weigh on investors. Top US trade officials accusing China of reneging on some of the key commitments it had made. We'll be taking a closer look at that in our business update. Vowing to continue to work in journalism, 2 Reuters journalists who had been jailed over their reporting on the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar are now free and back with their families. They've been given a presidential amnesty. Their release comes along with that of over 6,500 other people. The pardon is customary around the traditional New Year period there. Daniel Quinlan in Bangkok, our regional correspondent, tells us a bit more about this release.
There'd been high hopes that they'd be released in April as part of a mass prisoner release that takes place there every year for the New Year's celebrations. It took place again this year, but obviously they weren't among them. 9,000 prisoners were released, but only 2 political prisoners. Burma's government Myanmar's government, for its part, doesn't even acknowledge that it has political prisoners. It just says it incarcerates people who break the law. This was a very high-profile case. Their Reuters colleagues did a great job of keeping it in the news over the 500 days of incarceration. They also had people in the diplomatic community pushing the case, the UN, and even the high-profile barrister Amal Clooney.
Leaders of Turkey's main opposition party have been holding emergency meetings and planning their next move and indeed getting ready for new elections after their candidate, Ekrem İmamoğlu, was ousted from the office of Mayor of Istanbul. The country's electoral board decided to nullify his win in the March election and ordered a rerun for June 23rd, saying that the problem was that the people manning the ballot boxes had not all been civil servants, which is required by law. The board's decision comes on the back of a request for as much by the party of the president. Alexander Okot has the full story.
Fighting talk from Ekrem İmamoğlu as he chastised Turkey's electoral authority for voiding his election victory as mayor of Istanbul. The candidate of the main opposition Republican People's Party called the decision treacherous and vowed to win again in the rerun on the 23rd of June.
They might have pushed for and obtained a decision to win 40 to 45 days to cover their dirt. But let me tell you, we will rip back our right with a smile on our face.
İmamoğlu won the March the 31st election by some 13,000 votes ahead of his rival Binali Yildirim, the AKP candidate and former Prime Minister, a slim margin in Turkey's largest city, which has around 15 million residents. But according to the Electoral Authority, 43 assessors at the polling stations were not civil servants as stipulated by law. Prosecutors allege many of them were linked to the US-based cleric Fethullah Gulen, the longtime adversary of President Erdogan, who he blames for the failed 2016 coup plot. And ever since the first AKP loss of the city in 25 years, the president has never ceased to talk about voting irregularities.
There's been cheating. There's been corruption. All this is clear and unambiguous. Come and let's go before the people, and we will accept what the people's wish dictates. It's as simple as that.
The loss of Istanbul was particularly hard for Erdogan. He began his political ascent as its mayor, and at pre-election rallies the president repeatedly told crowds, whoever wins Istanbul wins Turkey.
Now, the head of the UN-backed government in Libya begins a tour of Europe, a bid to seek support in his fight against the strongman Khalifa Haftar, whose troops are currently attacking the capital of Tripoli in a bid to take over. Fayez al-Sarraj is to meet with the leaders of Italy, Germany, France and possibly the UK over the coming days. Erin Ogunki tells us more.
A desperate attempt to shore up unified European support amid escalating violence. UN-backed Libyan leader Fayez al-Sarraj will begin a series of meetings with European leaders on Tuesday. He will first meet with Italy's Giuseppe Conte before talks with Angela Merkel in Berlin and Emmanuel Macron in Paris. The EU has thus far failed to back a joint political solution to the crisis. While European leaders theoretically support al-Sarraj's government of national accord, the Libyan leader has accused France of backing Haftar's Libyan National Army, accusations Paris denies. As European leaders struggle to unite, the risk of a full-blown civil war is only growing. Speaking through the Libyan National Army spokesman on Sunday, General Haftar urged his troops to wipe out all opposition forces, despite the United Nations call for a Ramadan ceasefire.
Our battles against terrorism in the past in Benghazi and Derna did not stop for the holy month of Ramadan, but increased our determination and strength during this holy month. Officers and soldiers in our armed forces and the support forces, I salute you during these glorious days and urge you with your strength and determination to teach the enemy a greater and bigger lesson than the previous ones.
On April 4th, Khalifa Haftar launched an offensive on the Libyan capital of Tripoli, setting off a steep escalation in violence. In response, forces backing Sarraj's government of national accord launched a counteroffensive, leading to a stubborn but bloody stalemate on the outskirts of the capital. The recent wave of fighting has left more than 400 people dead, over 200 injured, and some 55,000 others displaced.
Now, it is the second strongest economy in Africa, just behind Nigeria. It's the world's leading producer of platinum and supplier of gold and diamonds. But for people living in South Africa, the national economy certainly isn't sparkling. Official unemployment is at 27%, rising to over 50% in the under 35s. The economy a key election issue, but the financial woes have seen another result, rising xenophobia, making immigration another hot-button topic. Our correspondent Stefan Karstens and Caroline Dumais report.
He was left for dead on the side of the highway, and when he looks back over the pictures of himself, Tinai Takawira remembers all too well. He was stabbed because he was Zimbabwean.
Said, we are foreigner, no need of foreigners here. We are driving a taxi, us is not working.
It's a miracle that this driver is still alive. One of his friends was less fortunate. 2 weeks ago, he was burnt alive in his truck. South African hauliers employ large numbers of foreign workers. Attacks are frequent.
This is the reality in the transport industry. Though authorities, they try to sanitize it to regard it as a criminal event, but there's element of xenophobia in place.
Attacks on working immigrants reflect South Africa's frustrations over growing unemployment, and the authorities regularly fan the flames by promising to control the borders. Immigration has been a campaign topic for all the political parties. Last week, the mayor of Johannesburg spoke out about his concerns.
There can be no doubt that immigration crisis in our country, it's actually contributing pressure on government to provide services with our limited funding. As I've just already indicated, another practical example in our clinics, where presently we get between 25 and 39% of people visiting our clinics being undocumented people.
Without a census, no one knows how many foreigners live in South Africa. But migrants' associations urge the authorities to stop stigmatizing them.
If we trace 2008, 2015, and again now this election season, there's this pattern of eruption with xenophobia. and a large denialism within politicians.
Tinay and his friends are keeping their heads down in the hope they'll be able to keep working. They've been living legally in South Africa for 10 years and have nowhere to go.
Well, let's cross now live to our correspondent Aisha Ismail in Cape Town. Aisha, looking there, the issues of xenophobia and immigration, where do the main parties stand on those issues?
Well, the main political parties are also engaged in double speak. They've been using the immigration issue during their election campaigns. And on the one hand, they're talking about undocumented immigrants coming into the country, working in the townships without permits and licenses. But on the other hand, they're also talking about South Africans, calling on South Africans not to attack illegal immigrants, because it is a fact that there is a significant number of immigrants contributing to South Africa's economy. But we've heard from the main parties like the Democratic Alliance and the African National Congress, where they did talk about the influx of undocumented immigrants coming into South Africa and working in the townships. And of course, the locals in the townships are claiming that immigrants are taking jobs away from them. But on the other hand, the immigrants are saying, we are not taking jobs away from local South Africans. We are creating jobs for ourselves.
It sounds, Aisha, like the real question is more economic factors rather than actual any sort of racism. Is it the economy then on forefront of people's minds? Where does the country stand on that?
Well, if one looks at the question of xenophobia in South Africa, or rather the attack on immigrants, and I have to say on African immigrants in South Africa, of course there is an element of xenophobia. There's also an element of opportunistic criminality, because immigrants who are in the country illegally are hesitant to go to the police to go and report attacks against them because they fear they will be arrested for being in the country illegally. But if one has a closer look at the issue, yes, it is about economics. It is about poor people competing for scarce resources like housing, like education and health services.
Indeed, and staggering high unemployment in South Africa. Aisha, are any of the parties coming up with, a miracle plan for these elections?
Well, the ruling African National Congress, the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, has talked about creating more jobs. He's talked about reviving the economy by bringing in more investment. He's talking about allocating more funding to education. But there are young people, there are about 10 million eligible voters who did not register to vote, which means that tomorrow, the 8th of May, about 10 million people will not be able to vote. And young people are saying, we're not voting because we do not know who to vote for. We do not trust the current political parties. And they're saying that even university graduates are unable to find work.
OK, Aisha Ismail, thanks a lot for giving us that insight into those elections, which of course are to get underway this Wednesday. We'll be checking in with you throughout polling. Aisha Ismail reporting for us live from Cape Town. Now, meanwhile, in Benin, locals are calling on the authorities to make sure that security in the country remains tight. It is seen as a safe place to live, work and go on holidays, but nerves are currently frayed after the body of a tour guide was found at the weekend in the national park. The car he was using located just across the border in Burkina Faso, and the 2 French tourists he was with are still missing.
Tourist guide Fiacre Beji's body was found on Saturday in Penjari National Park in northern Benin. It's one of the few areas where wild animals can still be seen in West Africa. The 2 French tourists he was with have been kidnapped, according to our correspondent. Their vehicle was discovered in Burkina Faso, just the other side of the border. In Benin, residents who live not far from the park are worried.
The guide was a close friend. The last time I saw him was on Tuesday. Hearing that he's died makes me so sad. I wonder if Benin has not become like Nigeria. I wonder if we're still safe in this country now.
If the authorities don't put more security forces in the area, we will lose our only tourism asset here in Benin, and that would be a real shame.
Pendjari National Park lies just south of Burkina Faso, where many jihadist militias operate. When attacks take place in Burkina Faso, armed groups rarely claim responsibility for them. But most of them have been attributed to three groups: the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, Ansarul Islam, and the GSIM, the group to support Islam and Muslims.
To some other news now, and US golfer Tiger Woods has been given the nation's highest civilian honour. President Donald Trump awarding the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He described Woods as a true legend who transformed the game and commended him on his fight through sports injuries to rise back to the top. Well, Woods is in fact the fourth golfer to earn that distinction in the United States. Now, if you're just joining us, these are our top stories this hour. Over 6,500 people have been given a presidential pardon and released from prison in Myanmar. Among them, 2 Reuters journalists. They had been arrested and put behind bars in 2017, charged with breaking the country's Official Secrets Act when they reported on the crackdown on Rohingya Muslims. Turkey's electoral board revokes the mandate of the mayor of Istanbul, saying the March election was flawed. That decision coming after the party of the president called for as much. Istanbul is the economic capital of the country. The man who had won the vote says the ruling party is calling fraud just because it lost. And as South Africa gets ready to hold general elections, we continue our coverage of some of the main issues. With staggeringly high unemployment and economic woes, xenophobia has been on the rise across the country.